Hello, everyone. My name is Kitsia Esteva. I use they pronouns. I'm the Grassroots Feminism's national organizer with the Grassroots Global Justice Alliance. And I'm joining today from occupied Raimatush Ohlone territory in San Francisco, California. My co-MC today is Danielle Chances. She's the daughter of a Dominican migrant and a community organizer based in North Central Florida, working to center climate change as a root cause of forced migration.
Y'all, I forgot to unmute. Hello, everyone. My name is Danielle, Danielle Chances, and I use she, her, ella pronouns. And I am the climate justice organizer with the Florida Immigrant Coalition, and I'm based out of Gainesville, Florida. It's occupied Miccosukee, Timucua, and Seminole territory. In today's rally, we commemorate the collapse of the Rana Plaza factories in Bangladesh 10 years ago. We're also here to remember the precarity that women workers work under all over the world creates horrible conditions that can lead to sickness and death. We are also here to uplift the fights garment workers and migrant women are organizing to this political period to sustain their lives and everyone else.
In the morning of April 24, 2013, more than 1,100 people, mostly women, were killed when Rana Plaza, an 8-story building that housed 5 garment factories on the outskirts of Dhaka, Bangladesh, collapsed in about 90 seconds. It is considered the deadliest accident in the history of modern garment industry and one of the worst industrial accidents ever. Many major retailers use the factories to produce their clothes, and the disaster led to a reckoning around workplace safety for garment workers and the responsibility of brands selling low-priced clothes to Western consumers. 10 years on, vigils commemorating the accident or the collapse that wasn't accidental are being held online and all over the world, including in Dhaka, London, New York, and here online today with us. We join the Voices of the World March of Women to commemorate the Rana Plaza working women who died in 2013. We also are in solidarity with women resisting climate change. We will be hearing testimonies today about the fight to protect and expand the temporary protected status program, TPS, and we will share how climate forced migration has particular gender impacts all over the world, and why having TPS automatically available to climate refugees is a small but important step for the US government to practice climate reparations. We wanted to remind everyone, we will be live tweeting away during the event. Please join us in live tweeting and tag us at GGJ Alliance, Fly Migrant, and This is Rising Up.
Just a quick correction for the tag for Florida Immigrant Coalition, that's FL Immigrant. So just make sure people can see that. But let us start the program with an acknowledgement of the work women in essential work industries have been doing to sustain all of us during this pandemic. And let us recognize that this tremendous effort is often coming at the expense of the workers themselves and their families. One such industry is the fashion and garment industry. During the COVID-19 pandemic, garment workers have not only continued to produce the clothes that we consume on a daily basis, but also have been producing personal protective equipment that we need to survive the pandemic, like surgical gowns and masks. They did this work under unsafe and unhealthy conditions while confronting wage theft. We see a gender division of labor around garment work, not only here in the US, but around the world. Let us watch a video that breaks down this gendered and racialized international division of labor and how garment workers are impacted by precarious working conditions and undercompensated.
Ever wondered where the clothes you wear are made and under which conditions? Most of the clothes and footwear we wear are made in countries from the global south, such as Bangladesh, Vietnam, El Salvador, and Honduras. The garment industry organizes itself in global chains of production controlled by large transnational corporations. These companies have their headquarters in northern countries, C&A in Belgium, Zara in Spain, and Nike in the United States. They outsource parts of the production to small companies, many of them informal, who then outsource another part of the production to smaller companies or even individual workers. The labor conditions are poor and usually the same throughout the global south. People work in small sweatshops, in their houses, and in buildings and factories which do not meet minimum safety requirements. This reduces the costs and increases the exploitation. A combination of the international sexual and racial divisions of labor is behind this capitalist logic. Most of these workers are women, often immigrants, black and non-white women. The work shifts are extensive, ranging from 14 to 16 hours per day, and there are barriers to unionizing. The workers sew fragments and parts. One cuts, another one makes the pockets, the other attaches the zipper, and so on. It takes a lot of work to receive meager wages. The profits of these companies up north are the exploitation and the precariousness in the countries of the south. We know the corporations buy their brands and stores, the production and the conditions of manufacturing, the cotton that consumes a lot of water and pollutes the rivers with chemicals used to dye the fabric, however, remains invisible. The rhythm of exploitation and contamination is more and more intense and sped up. The clothes aren't made to last. They are called fast fashion. The stores offer credit cards with abusive interest rates that tangle the people in a vicious cycle, indebted but with trendy outfit. Big corporations shy away from responsibility over the labor conditions. The scandals of workers in slavery, like situations and violations that have led to thousands and thousands of workers losing their lives while working. That was the case of the fire in a garment factory in Pakistan in 2012, and when the Rana Plaza building collapsed in Bangladesh in 2013. These are the same companies that spend a lot of money on advertising and actions in the name of women's empowerment and diversity. They also brandish dubious certifications of supposedly sustainable cotton production, which is usually produced with pesticides and monoculture. They don't trick us with this purple and greenwashing that obscures so much exploitation, rights violations, and environmental pollution. Our struggles are not commodities. We resist to live, we march to transform.
Thank you. So that is an important video produced by the World March of Women. And the call to action that we march to transform is part of the reason why we're here today. Really important to speak to the question of garment workers and the continued fight for workers' rights in the garment industry. There is a petition that is going to go on your screen in a moment for the Pay Up campaign, which our members, the Garment Workers Center of Los Angeles is a part of. This is an international campaign that is specifically calling for all the major brands that are basically promoting starvation wages and horrible conditions around the planet for garment workers to pay up the contracts that they give garment factories to keep workers safe, to go transparent on their budgets and where they're putting their money, to give workers center stage, to sign enforceable contracts, end starvation wages, and help pass laws. So feel free to go to that link. There's a way for you to sign a petition to demand that major labels are keeping with these demands. There's also a tracker that the Pay Up campaign has, where they basically track all the labels, and only when they have done all 7 actions for garment workers are they taken out of the tracker. So you'll see whenever the brands are on this tracker, it means that they haven't actually fulfill their duty to pay up and be in right relationship with garment workers. So with that, I pass it back to Danielle.
And so as we commemorate the anniversary of the Rana Plaza collapse, we also want to speak to the calamity of climate change. Bangladesh is one of the most climate vulnerable countries on Earth, producing only 0.5% of global emissions, but ranking 7th in the world most affected by climate change. An estimated 1 out of 7 of its projected 200+ million people are expected to be displaced by climate conditions in 2050. Women and femmes are at particular risk of violence and death due to lower social status and fewer economic options, resources, and rights. We lift up the women and gender-oppressed people around the world, developing solutions for real economic recovery, expanding worker rights, demanding climate reparations, and resisting forced migration. Back over to Kitsia. Kitsia, you're still muted.
Thank you. As we connect and fight in solidarity with working women around the world, we remember our particular role as social justice transformative organizers who are also feminists and anti-imperialists inside the belly of the empire. We recognize that the US is still the biggest polluter in the planet, and that the US military is the single largest polluting institution devastating the world. In 1998, Hurricane Mitch battered much of Central America, killing thousands of people and causing billions of dollars in property damage. The United States government responded by allowing Nicaraguan and Honduran nationals present in the United States to legally reside and work in the US for the next 18 months. And following this, the United States Citizens and Immigration Services also put a place on temporary stay for the deportation actions against nationals from El Salvador. Today, the vast majority of TPS holders are from Central America. The United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs estimates that in 2019, women and girls were roughly 47.9% of the international migrants. Yet TPS holders from 10 countries tracked by the United States Customs and Immigration Services are only 43.71 women and 56.23 men, meaning that women migrants are underrepresented among TPS holders in the United States. So next, I want to introduce you to Yarelis Mendoza Zamora, who will speak to us about expanding TPS for Central American and Caribbean migrants. Yarelis is the national campaigns organizer with FLIC. Born and raised in Miami, Yarelis grew up listening to Nicaraguan families' immigration stories and constantly drawing inspiration from them. She graduated from the University of Florida with a bachelor's in English and history, as well as a minor in Latin American studies. Yarelis is passionate about centering voices that were deliberately silenced, a proud feminist, and lives by the Gloria Anzaldua's quote, "Wild tongues can be tamed, only caught." Welcome, Yarelis.
Thank you, Kitsia. And before I start, I want to acknowledge and name just how broken the United States immigration system is, how it tears apart our families, how it creates stress and angst, and was created by white supremacists to keep white imperial colonial capitalist systems in place. And we use what we can use from this system to keep ourselves safe while recognizing that the master's tools will never set us free. We survive for right now because that's what we can do. Temporary protected status was created by Congress in the 1990s, and it was meant to fill in a gap, to help individuals who could not fit the legal definition of a refugee or an asylum seeker, but still could not return to their country of origin because of unsafe conditions. And so TPS is granted to a country when it meets some of the following criteria. There's 3. When there's an armed conflict, like what is currently happening in Sudan. When there is a natural disaster, like what happened with Hurricane Eta and Iota, or even with what happened with Haiti in 2010 with that devastating earthquake. Or there is an extraordinary condition like there is in Nicaragua, where a revolution that started out with hope has transformed into an authoritarian dictatorship and is now leaving a legacy where over 400 individuals since 2018 have been killed seeking change. And so TPS gives folks who would otherwise be living in the shadows a work permit, keeps them safe from deportations, a social security, but there is still no clear pathway to residency or citizenship. TPS is not enough, but there are various organizations who are fighting for a redesignation of TPS for Honduras, Nicaragua, and El Salvador. FLIC is among those organizations because we're doing whatever we can to keep our people safe. There's a fight for an original designation of TPS for Guatemala. And with these temporary protections, over 1 million individuals will be safe from deportations for up to 18 months. And we know that living with TPS is also living from deadline to deadline. And there are over 300,000 individuals who have had TPS for 20 years and who are a little bit stuck because there's still no clear-cut pathway to citizenship, like I had mentioned. And yet, for the over 1 million undocumented individuals who are sick and tired of living in the shadows, this is their ask, an ask that is coming directly from affected communities, saying that they need to be safe some way, somehow, that they want to stay with their families some way, somehow. And as the climate crisis worsens and there is still no acknowledgement of climate refugees, TPS will be one of the tools that is going to be used to ask for protections. As was mentioned, TPS was used to protect Nicaraguans and Hondurans after the wrath of Mitch completely devastated the Central American region. And I would also be remiss if I didn't mention the way that TPS has not been used to protect nations in the Caribbean. In 2019, after Hurricane Dorian ravaged the Bahamas, TPS was not granted to the Bahamas because the Trump administration believed that TPS had been overused. And in fact, under the Trump administration, they tried to cancel TPS for hundreds of thousands of people. So this is a vulnerable program, but it is still a life-saving program because individuals are not forced to return back to their countries that are unsafe, that are unable to welcome their nationals. And for those of y'all who don't know, TPS is something that can be granted by the Secretary of DHS. It is completely up to their discretion and in the administration's discretion to go ahead and grant these protections. And our ask is that the Biden administration respond quickly to what's happening in Honduras, Nicaragua, El Salvador, and Guatemala, and redesignate and extend these protections to new individuals. Thank you.
And I believe both Danielle and Yarelis will be speaking also to the conditions of what's taking place in Florida, as Florida is one of the states with the largest TPS population, and many of the people there are personally impacted by climate forced migration. So pass it back to you for that.
Definitely.
Yeah.
We have one of the largest concentrations of Haitian TPS holders. We do also have a large concentration of Hondurans, Nicaraguans, and Salvadorians who are seeking protections from TPS.
Yeah. And currently in Florida, we are the lucky home to a rising fascist movement. Sense my sarcasm there. As Governor DeSantis tries to make it impossible for undocumented people and mixed status families to live in the state. Fascism is at home in Orlando in the form of Bolsonaro. And as we see DeSantis try to make a play for the White House, he's doing so off the backs of publicity stunts on the backs of our immigrant community, trying to do publicity stunts for cheap political points. We're currently in the fight, I would say, for our lives here in the state of Florida when it comes to immigration. We are fighting against legislation known as HB 1617 and Senate Bill 1718, which is specific to, it's really a packet of legislation, of anti-immigrant legislation. We did have some wins over the weekend as the legislation has changed a little bit, but for example, whereas before in the legislation, it was saying anybody who's transporting people within the state of Florida who is unauthorized, that could be criminalized by up to a second-degree felony where people could face up to 15 years in prison. We've seen that language change over the weekend now, where they're only talking about people who are being transported into the state of Florida, but that's still problematic. What does that mean for families who are coming to Florida for vacation, going to visit Disney? Who is an unauthorized person? That includes TPS holders, that includes DACA recipients, that can include asylum seekers. And so as it was already mentioned, I believe in this call, immigration is a crazy system. It is impossible to navigate. And so DeSantis and the Republican legislature are really trying their best to make sure Florida is a hostile place for all immigrants. And Jadelis has shared in the chat a Florida travel advisory that we are behind in addition to other orgs in the state of Florida. And we would encourage those of you, especially outside of the state of Florida, to share the travel advisory because it is not safe for people to be traveling into our state. And we want to make sure everybody is advised. I'm also going to drop a link to what's going on with our Florida legislature in case anybody wants to keep up with how things are going in our legislature currently. I dropped the link there so you all can track both the House bill and the Senate bill. Our Florida legislative session ends on May 5th, so we have about 10 days to go, but it's going to be a rough 10 days.
Yes, as Danielle was mentioning, we are currently in the fight of our lives. It is not an overstatement to say that, and it is not an overstatement to say that while DeSantis right now is Florida's problem, he will very soon be a problem for the national stage and even for the international stage. And so we're not alone in this fight. We need y'all to help uplift what is happening in the state of Florida, and also the fact that we're not staying silent. We're not just sitting here and letting them walk over us. We're rising up, we're fighting back. Thank you.
Thank you both. Super important to be in solidarity with Florida as a state that is impacted both by climate change and now the rise of the right wing, knowing that what impacts Florida actually impacts other places in the US, and that as our comrades just named, even the question of flying to Florida, traveling to Florida now is a big one. But in general, that what happens in Florida can actually take over again the rest of the nation. And it is important for us to be in solidarity and in resistance with our comrades in Florida. With that being said, I wanted to pass it to another one of our comrades here from who's a member organizer with FLIC, Sonia Moreno, who's gonna continue to share expanding TPS for Central American migrants. In her specific testimony as a previous TPS holder, Sonia is originally from Honduras. She's an immigrant who left the country, her family, and is resident of the state of Florida since 1996. In 1991, she was able to qualify for the temporary protection program, which was given to several countries after the passage, after the horrible Hurricane Mitch happened. Today, she's a community leader who teaches and shares with migrant community about their constitutional rights. Together with the Florida Immigrant Coalition, organizes and defends the rights of migrants and dreams of recovering her status as her immigration status, either through an immigration reform or a redesignation of TPS for Honduras. At this moment, Sonia is gonna join us. I wanna encourage everyone who is not on the Zoom interpretation channel to go to the interpretation in English so you can hear her remarks. She will speaking to us in Spanish. Welcome, Sonia.
Gracias, Kitsia. Gracias
Thank
por la
you
oportunidad.
so much, Kitsia. Thank you for this opportunity. Hello, good afternoon. I am Sonia. I am Honduras. I am a migrant. I left my country, my family, including my first son, who was only 11 months old. Today, I have not seen my son in 28 years. When I was 21, I arrived to the US. I crossed the three borders until I reached my final destination in the state of Florida. This was in 1996. Now, in 1999, I was able to qualify for the Temporary Protected Status Program, TPS, which was given to several countries after the terrible Hurricane Mitch in Central America. Now, not to mention that years later, my partner at that time would mark me for life with his abuse, his mental, physical abuse, and several times even economical abuse, forcing me to obey his orders as my partner. Abuses to which one day I refused to continue accepted, and he cruelly began a plan to denounce me for harassment. And one day he called the police on me. And thus began this way my nightmare. And me, without knowing my constitutional rights, I did not know how to defend myself before the judge. And not knowing English, I would just show up to my citations without really understanding the judicial process. And thus I lost my case, which years later caused me the denial to renew my TPS. Now, after 29 years, I am a mother of two young people who are born in the United States. They are 17 and 18 years old, and for whom I decided to stay and continue working to give them a better education and not deny them the right to grow up in the country where they were born. Also, after being affected by the loss of my immigration status, I began to learn and to know more about the rights of migrants. Well, due to depression and fear, being separated from my two kids haunted me for many years, and it was terrifying for me. Today, I am a community leader who teaches and shares with the migrant community about their constitutional rights alongside with the Florida Immigrant Coalition. I organize and I advocate for migrant rights and dreams. And I dream of regaining my immigration status, whether it be through immigration reform or a redesignation of TPS for Honduras. Very well. TPS should be a program that protects everyone permanently and not be more than just something temporary. For the simple reason that precisely for being a temporary protection status, it is that today, my children, my family, myself, personally suffer and live day to day these consequences. And I am a very clear example of the broken immigration system and the lack of interest for giving true, fair solutions, solutions that are more fair to our lives in this country. During all of this time that I have been here without being able to renew my TPS, and despite all of this, I have continued contributing to this great nation of opportunities, working, paying taxes, just like any other American citizen in this country. Now, TPS needs to be expanded beyond these temporary conditions. People cannot return back to their countries of origin because conditions are not stable. What is needed? It's a pathway to citizenship. Bilateral discussions in countries that can qualify are quite complex and sometimes are impacted by corruption of governments. This is a clear example, right? My country, Honduras, is a clear example, which during the last two natural disasters, even during the COVID-19 pandemic, the true situation was hidden. It was hidden by a president who we all now know who he's in a jail in New York, here in the US, leaving our beautiful country, Honduras, sunk in extreme poverty without counting all the victims that have died during all these years without being able to get justice. My kids do not want to go back to Honduras. They do not want to live in Honduras. Why? Why deny them that freedom to enjoy their country as all kids should? The emotional sequels, I see them in my kids, and that is cruel and inhumane. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sonia, for your powerful words. As someone who directly organizes with you, I'm always so grateful for your fire, your bravery, and commitment to organizing migrant communities. You're an organizer that I look up to. Um, you're directly impacted, but you are somebody who never allows their voice to be silenced. Can you all see? Yes, okay. Your passion keeps me going and inspires so many others to continue in the fight for justice for all. I see the way the community that you work in admires you, and you're an inspiration to me. I know to our team at Flick, and I'm sure to everybody in this call. You have a truly powerful story. And I'll pass it over to Kitsia.
Yeah, I wanted to just the what's being projected on the screen. I don't know if Sonia wants to share a little bit about her artwork for a moment. Sonia, you're muted.
Gracias, Kitsia. Sí, para quienes me conocen personalmente, y creo que anteriormente hemos compartido esto con Kitsia, en un momento, precisamente durante la pandemia, comencé a dibujar, a pintar, porque esa ha sido una de mis mejores terapias, ¿verdad? Para muchas veces cuando tenemos esos momentos difíciles, emocionales, a mí me ha ayudado mucho. Y justamente en este tiempo comenzaba a ser una de las organizadoras de TPS aquí en el sur de la Florida. Y esto aquí, como pueden ver, es las insignias del de TPS, ¿verdad? Que es el Temporary Protection Status en inglés. Y comencé a crear esta idea y a recordar cómo yo llegué a este país.
Started to remember how I came to this country, how I came to this country, and what impulsed me, what allowed me to change, to be able to continue working and continue supporting my family that was in Honduras. Now, one of these parts, you can see there's a tree, there's a person sitting. Now, that person is my father who died 9 years after me being here, and I was never able to see it. Now, I was able to remember whenever he would go to the fields and he had time, he would stop to see his photographs. Now, that is where I draw that person sitting down in honor of my father. Now, that person here on the corner from left to right, this is a part of how I remember my country, the fields, the nature. Our country is beautiful.
And I had the opportunity
I've
to
had the
live for my
chance.
first 21 years. And then after that, as you can see, there is a road that goes over, that crosses. Can you hear me? Yes. There is a road that, goes through all this part here in the painting, and it's on the, you can see an S that reaches, the idea is to reach to the great city, the big, American dream, the ocean that is represented here in the state of Florida. And in the middle, you can see here muros, that is the wall that divide us from our countries, from our families, and our past, one way or another, in our present. Here you can see letter P, and then in the middle you can see some little white dots. I try to do it, the most uniform as possible, and they're white, right? Because TPS represents, like this, in these paintings, I try to represent what TPS represents for us that had a TPS. It's a protection, it's so fragile, this that everybody has this benefit. They have to live their lives like those little dots. They have to be perfect, straight, to be able to continue with the renewal or the approval of TPS. The case that in my situation was very unfair, because without knowing my rights, or not having the resources at that point to be able to defend myself at some point, that was denied. According to the lawyers, they have told me that it was lack of information that I lost my TPS. It wasn't even because of the case. I left a lot of time go by, and this represents what it means to me, the loss of TPS. I'm going to be a little more brief. On the bottom, you can see some messages, including, what we know as the 401k, that many of us had been part of that program. That's the Social Security. When we become, older, we're not going to be able to enjoy our Social Security, our retirement. So this is part of what I can share in this thing. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm not a professional artist. I'm just trying to express myself. Thank you, Kisia, for the opportunity to offer me these minutes to talk a little further about this painting. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sonia. Maria Jose is a self-described weird, cosmic, and queer islander from Puerto Rico. Esoterica Tropical's music journey began as a student of classical vocal performance in Puerto Rico's prestigious Conservatory of Music. After a series of health issues derailed her music studies and began a treatment for Hashimoto's disease in 2009, including daily swims at the San Juan's El Escabron Beach. It was there on one serendipitous day that she was approached by a lifeguard on duty. To her surprise, her friend Constanza, a violinist she'd met during her conservatory days. While catching up, Maria Jose confessed to her she had begun making up songs in the shower, and the very next day, Constanza had gifted her her first harp. That chance encounter led to Maria Jose's Monjitos' first collection of songs, the self-released Estrellas, currently moving between Mexico, Puerto Rico, and Oakland, California. Maria Jose Montijo, Esoterica Tropical, forthcoming album Esoterica Tropical is due on 2023. And with that, I pass it to Maria Jose to share a few words and a first song.
Gracias, Kitsia. So yes, I'm a Puerto Rican and I've lived in
Thank you,
California
Kitsa.
for 15 years. Um, as a Puerto Rican living in the diaspora, eh, and in the Puerto Rican community in Oakland, California, we suffered a lot from the vicarious trauma after Hurricane Maria. And after Hurricane Maria, there began this massive government ensued and federal government ensued disaster capitalism shock doctrine that has created tons of displacement of Puerto Ricans in the island and a lot of movement of rich people that come to tax evade to Puerto Rico, creating even more displacement. So the first song that I'm gonna sing is about migration. I hope you like it. And if you can't listen to me, well, let me know, okay? Fuego en la maleza y me lanzo a andar lejos de mis raíces. Este mundo es mi hogar. Miro a la cara el miedo para encontrar mi lugar. He pedido a mi tribu, pedí la identidad. Solo queda el coraje de pagar y vagar y de que cada paso sea un ritual. No saber es el juego de la brula y adentro. Hola y adiós. Llegué y me voy. Son los chistes del tiempo. Hola y adiós. Llegué y me voy. Son los chistes del tiempo. La fuerza del destino es camino desigual. El camino es misterio. El camino es limpiar el jardín abandonado de mi propia verdad. No saber es el juego de la brújula de adentro. Hola y adiós. Llegué y me voy. Son los chistes del tiempo. Hola y adiós. Llegué y me voy. Son los chistes del tiempo. Son los chistes del tiempo. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria Jose, for those words. And that song was a really great way to clean the space. Pass it back to Danielle to keep sharing with us before we will have Maria Jose again in a few minutes to share 2 more songs. So stay tuned and don't leave yet. But Danielle.
Unmute myself. Thank you, Kitsia. So earlier I spoke about Bangladesh's particular climate vulnerability. And as we know, the entire Southeast Asia has been impacted by climate catastrophe. In 2019, Southeast and East Asia had already recorded the internal displacement of 9.6 million people from cyclones, floods, and typhoons, representing almost 30% of all global displacements in that year. Catastrophic flooding has left 1/3 of Pakistan underwater and devastated the country's healthcare, education, and agricultural infrastructure. 1 in every 7 Pakistanis has been impacted by the flooding. And this has displaced 7.9 million people, impacted more than 33 million people, and killed at least 1,600 people and counting. The floods were brought on by a severe heat wave, which caused glaciers at the mountains to melt and heavier than normal monsoon rains. And yet the United States has refused to take action and grant a temporary protection status to Pakistani refugees. While Congress and Biden's cabinet debate whether granting TPS to Pakistan will further US interests, the country is on the verge of a public health crisis as millions suffer from waterborne disease. Regardless of the conversations around the impact of flooding on the United States, Pakistan's suffering is the direct result of global inaction to the threats of climate change, an unfair consequence for a country that contributes less than 1% of global carbon emissions. Now we look to re-envision TPS for the era of climate change. Climate-caused displacement is no longer hypothetical. As the present and future threat of the climate crisis looms large, it's imperative that the international community considers creating dependable and enduring protections for climate migrants. Through TPS, US immigration policy is partially equipped, and I say that again with emphasis, partially equipped to respond to human migration caused by sudden onset disasters like storms. However, the existing legal framework of US immigration policy will be inadequate to address the needs of displaced persons in an era of mass migration fueled by climate change. We have with us our comrade Mohima Ahmed, who will share some remarks about the fight for TPS for Pakistan, or for Pakistani climate refugees and climate justice reparations. Mohiba is a member of our drum, Desist Rising Up and Moving, and playing leading roles in the campaign for TPS/SSR and for base building in Little Pakistan in Brooklyn. Mohiba comes from a history of work in several grassroots feminist and student rights organizations in Pakistan, and is one of the founding members of Progressive Students' Collective and Haquq-e-Khalaq Party Pakistan. She was one of the leading organizers in the Students' Solidarity March in 55 cities of Pakistan in 2019, and became the spokesperson of Student Action Committee, the first national students' alliance in Pakistan since the 1980s. Currently, she is pursuing her master's at NYU's Near Eastern Department. And now, over to Mohiba.
Thank you so much, comrades, for this opportunity. I'm here in the US as an international student from Pakistan, and I was in Pakistan last summer when my country was hit by the worst floods in its history. And I've been working since last year with Drum that has been organizing working class South Asian and Indo-Caribbean people in New York City. To put the construction caused by the floods in context, the recent floods in Pakistan have killed more than 2,000 people and displaced more than 35 million. 15% of Pakistan's total population has been affected. These floods are worse than the floods that we saw in Pakistan in 2010. And Pakistan is facing the worst inflation in its history at the moment and has lost at least $10 billion due to the widespread destruction caused by the floods. Who are the ones most affected by the floods, the rising inflation and food shortages? It is the people on the margins, the working class. The global north is a major contributor to these conditions, having exceeded its share of safe emissions in 1939, almost 8 decades before the current flooding that we are witnessing. Pakistan, on the other hand, has not even used its fair share of safe emissions. Since 1959, the country had contributed 0.4% to the total greenhouse gases, whereas countries in the global north have exceeded their quotas by 90%. Furthermore, since 1988, Pakistani governments have signed more than a dozen loan agreements with the IMF. And the structural adjustment has always come with a deal of liberalization of trade and finance, privatization of state-owned industries, drastic cuts to public subsidies, and the commodification of nature, which has contributed in displacing masses of people, impoverishing them, and making them vulnerable and unable to deal with climate catastrophes. Liberals present such disasters as humanitarian issues, erasing the political economic roots of the tragedy, which is a clear attempt to depoliticize the suffering of people and obstructing accountability of countries and companies in the global north, giving the false impression that we are all in this together as one threatened human family. The bigger picture tells us a different story. Pakistan's external debt is at $28 billion with inflation reaching unprecedented heights. However, it is the working class and the middle class factions of the society that are facing the worst effect of the climate disaster as well as the economic crisis. Most of the undocumented Pakistanis in the US belong to the working class and have made it here in search of better work opportunities. However, as undocumented individuals, they remain vulnerable to exploitation. These individuals have been sustaining their households back home, but at the cost of personal hardship, losing all connection to their families, not being able to visit even in the case of a death of a loved one. Undocumented women workers face greater challenges as they are employed at even lower wages than their male counterparts. Not only that, families, especially the children and wives of undocumented men, suffer a life of uncertainty and loneliness back home. TPS should not be a request. It is a right of undocumented migrants who are a backbone of US workforce. It can also be considered a small form of climate reparation. However, TPS is just a temporary solution and should not be considered an end goal in and of itself. TPS is an immediate need for vulnerable people who belong to countries impacted by conflicts and environmental crises, and will allow them to better help themselves and their people. However, it is by no means a lasting solution. It is important to recognize the power dynamics that exist between capitalist states like the US and vulnerable states like Pakistan that need to request for TPS because they are not able to provide opportunities to their own citizens in times of crisis. However, these crises, environmental or otherwise, are in fact the creation of capitalist states like the US. These power dynamics raise a lot of questions of whether the US designation of TPS is a political matter. Does the US make decisions based on its foreign interest? Does the US influence a country whether to request for TPS or not? And the very narrow statutory process for TPS also forces communities from each country to fight and advocate separate from each other and prevents regional cooperation or regional analysis. Our ultimate goal should not be to lose sight in the fight for the temporary solution of TPS, but expanding this fight to encompass the goal of combating capitalism, global inequality and oppression, and reparative solutions. Thank you so much.
It's me. Thank you so much, Muhiba, for your words and really your amazing remarks, the importance of, just the way you just dropped the mic on the issue is beyond TPS, is beyond the conditions we're facing with folks who are right now seeking refuge. It is a question of global capital and the ways in which the US in particular has its interest in continuing to devastate the world, in continuing to keep communities impacted at bay, and in many ways also the ways in which we are in direct responsibility to transform the way that the US relates to the rest of the world, right? And Pakistan is one of many examples of why TPS should be expanded to an automatic designation. The US should transform its relationship to climate mass forced migration. Please sign the petition you'll see on your screen to support DROM, get Pakistan to be TPS designated. For those of you who are familiar with the People's Orientation to a Regenerative Economy, our 15th plank to the regenerative economy affirms that we must transition from economies of war and violence that perpetrate systems of oppression towards regenerative economies of life. A just transition means investing in alternatives to policing and military intervention that advance accountability, healing, and transformative justice, including for those in military and police, while upholding communities' self-determination and sovereignty. It is our duty to develop a reparative approach to US foreign and immigration policy. Expanding TPS to become a holistic and reparative program is one important step towards that transformation.
The TPS program could be transformed into a reparative approach to climate change if countries who are suffering climate devastation were automatically assigned, and if the program became permanent. The program should also create a pathway to citizenship to TPS recipients, specifically for those who have been in the country for several years, like my dear comrade and coworker, Sonia. Finally, in order to remediate class and gender disparities, Congress should allocate funds to this program to provide grants for travel to migrant refugees impacted by climate catastrophe.
And so with that in mind, we are going to be closing pretty soon. We want to bring back our dear comrade, Maria Jose, to share two last songs and welcome everyone to, just take deep breaths, think about, ways in which you can support and remember that this fight for climate change, against climate change and for the rights of climate refugees goes beyond this question of TPS, but that we are, if we think of expanding, I think something that Yarelis beautifully said around the master's tools will not dismantle, right, the master's house. As we know, this program it's in many ways vulnerable, is not looking at the real solutions, but in these organizations like Flick and Drum and many other organizations at GGA that are working with migrant communities, we know that there's ways in which we can have a transformative and reparative way of looking at these programs, and we must, because it is a moment of climate crisis that is only going to be expanding. So with that, I'll pass it back to Maria Jose.
Gracias.
Thank you.
So this song that I'm gonna do is called Huracán. It's a song that I wrote after Hurricane Maria. Hurricane Maria made evident in Puerto Rico climate crisis and made a lot of Puerto Ricans climate refugees, specifically to Florida. There was a forced migration because people lost their homes, and now people are losing their homes because of displacement, because of disaster capitalism. So this song talks about that, and it goes like this. Huracán, sopla la junta pa'l carajo. Huracán, llévate lo que no sirve. Huracán, viento de cambio que asoma. Huracán, para sacudir la colonia. Huracán, coño, despierta boricua. No les importa tu vida, amate a ti y a tu tierra. Vive la soberanía, la libertad se cultiva. Tus sueños son las semillas para levantar nuestra fuerza, fuerza grande, colectiva, pa'l carajo la junta, pa'l carajo la colonia, pa'l carajo la deuda. Esa deuda es ilegal y no la vamos a pagar, y no la vamos a pagar, y no la vamos a pagar, y no la vamos a pagar. Huracán, este gobierno no sirve, no queremos dictadura, que se quieren quedar con todo, y no los vamos a dejar, y no los vamos a dejar. Nosotros vamos a luchar, nosotros vamos a luchar, nosotros vamos a luchar. Huracán, sopla la junta pa'l carajo, llévate lo que no sirve, viento de cambio que asoma, pa' sacudir la colonia. Coño, despierta boricua, no les importa tu vida, ámate a ti y a tu tierra. Vive la soberanía, vive la soberanía, vive la soberanía. La libertad se cultiva, tus sueños son las semillas, para levantar nuestra fuerza, fuerza grande colectiva, fuerza grande colectiva, fuerza grande colectiva. Pa'l carajo la junta, pa'l carajo la colonia, pa'l carajo la deuda. Esa deuda es ilegal y no la vamos a pagar, 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 y no la vamos a pagar. Estado de emergencia, violencia horizontal, estado de emergencia, ni una mujer más. Estado de emergencia, violencia horizontal, estado de emergencia, ni una mujer más. Huracán, sopla la junta pa'l carajo, huracán, llévate lo que no sirve, viento de cambio que asoma, pa' sacudir la colonia. Coño, despierta boricua, no le importa tu vida, ámate a ti y a tu tierra. Vive la soberanía, la libertad se cultiva, tus sueños son las semillas, para levantar nuestra fuerza, fuerza grande colectiva. Pa'l carajo la junta, pa'l carajo la colonia, pa'l carajo la deuda. Esa deuda es ilegal y no la vamos a pagar, 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 y no la vamos a pagar. Pa'l carajo la junta, pa'l carajo la colonia. Thank you for the silent clapping. This song is called Esotérica Tropical. It's the name of my musical project, which is in transition from Maria Jose Montijo to Esotérica Tropical. Work in progress as always. This song is about protecting the earth, protecting our bodies and our natural resources. Tan frágil el reflejo en el cristal, viento como la luz baila en el mar. La marea canta siempre su canción, alucinante cuando se pone el sol. Esotérica tropical, esotérica tropical. Las olas vienen y se van, besos mojados para la arena enamorar. Soy sirena, soy el sol y soy el mar. Y mi alimento es sonidos en cantar. Esotérica tropical, esotérica tropical, esotérica tropical, esotérica tropical. El agua refresca mi alma, 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 el agua refresca mi alma. Es la fuerza natural que te invita a luchar por nuestro país, por nuestra tierra, por nuestro futuro, por los que vendrán. Y es que el Caribe te da mucha malla, mucha fuerza, mucha malla, mucha fuerza, mucha malla, mucha malla, mucha malla, mucha malla, mucha malla, mucha fuerza. Ready para la lucha, yo soy la naturaleza, soy caribeña, latinoamericana, y a mí me habla el corazón del agua y en Maya, yo te escucho y en Maya, hasta yo te escucho, madre tierra, tú latir es mi palpitar. Defenderte mi promesa, esta tierra se respeta, mucha malla, mucha fuerza. Yo estoy ready para la lucha, yo soy la naturaleza, soy caribeña, latinoamericana, y a mí me habla el corazón del agua y en Maya, yo te escucho en Maya, hasta yo te escucho, madre tierra. Tú latir es mi palpitar, defenderte es mi promesa, esta tierra se respeta. El agua fluye como la sangre en las venas, lluvia cargada de llanto, aguacero, el cuerpo un río, un océano. Nuestra vida es la tierra, nuestra vida es el agua. Vamos a defenderla. Muchísimas gracias por invitarme. Un placer y un honor estar aquí.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It's been such a pleasure to be here with you tonight.
Thank you so much, Maria Jose. That was so beautiful hearing your music. I know I got a little emotional just hearing it. And I'm seeing a lot of support in the chat. Sefu talked about how they're creative artists as well and would love to collaborate with you. And yeah, I love to just see the community connection that we build here in this space. And that's really the end of our programming. So I just want to say thank you to everybody for taking the time to be here with us this evening to honor the anniversary of the Rana Plaza and continue to be in this feminist space as we continue to build together and build for bigger and better things for the world we want to see.
Thank you so much. We will see you next time. Muchas gracias. Thank you for the beautiful music, Maria Jose. I am in tears for sure, and committed through spirit also to continue defending sovereignty of all communities, including Puerto Rican community. Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Adiós. Gracias.